Hello, welcome back to Going to Ground. My name's Andrew Rumsey. We're in more familiar surroundings today after a visit to Salisbury yesterday in the Westwoods, leaning against a tree with the sound of a tractor and seed drill behind me. There's a field just up the path, can't see it, but you can probably hear the tractor. It's great to see the fields being ploughed and seed being sown, feeling of progress into the year and fruitfulness ahead. Are you ready for some extreme Lenten contemplation? I'm not sure I am, but the day offers it, which is the remembrance of Walter Hilton, who was a 14th century mystic and a very well-known one in the English contemplative tradition, if that's the field that you plough. And there is a copy of the Ladder of Perfection. It's my father's, actually. I find his name and the date 1957 on the front page, and so this came to me from him, and I've never read it fully, but I've dipped into it, and I've dipped into it again this morning to bring you a couple of little excerpts. It's written to as advice to an enclosed anchoress. Do you remember last year we spoke a bit about Julian of Norwich and about those who sometimes were bricked into the contemplative life. They lived a deliberately solitary calling, and it was seen as a very sacred and holy thing to choose to do that, to withdraw from the world and to engage utterly in a life of prayer. Staggering to think of that undertaking. And so he is counseling throughout the book ways of living so that you may be ready for enclosure. He says, I mean, it's mind-boggling, that, isn't it? But, you know, given that we're still experiencing a degree of enclosure in our personal and spiritual lives, maybe there is something here to be rediscovered. And it's hard medicine, as I indicated at the beginning, but from time to time that's really necessary. And it's really necessary also if we're to make sense of the Christian tradition as something not just easy. And the Christian faith is not meant to be the broad and easy path. It's the straight and narrow way, and that's why in Lent we really try to reckon with that and live it out insofar as we're able. So some 600-year-old spiritual advice. I'll just read you a little passage and then we'll consider what's meant by it. I should just start by saying, actually, long preamble, that he begins at the start of the book by saying there are two paths really for the Christian life, two ways of climbing the ladder of perfection. One is through the outer active life of love and charity, good works basically, and then there's the inner life of contemplation, and that's what he's primarily engaged with in writing. Nevertheless, he begins chapter 42. They're only short chapters. There is one work in which it is both very necessary and helpful to engage, and which, so far as human efforts are concerned, is a highway leading to contemplation. This is for a person to enter into themselves and to understand their own soul with all its powers, virtues, and sins. In this interior examination, you will come to recognize the honor and dignity proper to the soul at its creation, and the wretchedness and error into which you had fallen through sin. This realization will bring with it a heartfelt desire to recover the dignity and honor which you have lost. You will be filled with disgust and contempt for yourself, and with a firm resolve to humble yourself and destroy everything that stands between you and that dignity and joy. This task, however, is necessary if a person is to detach his heart and mind from the love of all earthly things, from vain thoughts and material considerations, and from misplaced love of self, so that his soul may find no satisfaction in them. And then this is crucial. Then insofar as the soul cannot find its satisfaction in the love and sight of Jesus Christ, it is bound, to suffer pain. And indeed, until this root is completely dug up and exposed, as it were, almost dried up by the casting out of all loves and fears of the world and the flesh, the soul can never experience the burning love of Jesus Christ. Okay, don't know how you swallow that with your breakfast this morning, but that's the kind of style of his teaching. And I think what I need to hear from that, and I simply reflect on with you, is and this is a strand in Jesus' teaching, of course it is, that there's a sense in which we have to, because the love of the self and of the world and of material things is so powerful, so we're so driven by self-love. We're also charitable as well, and we've that curious blend we've talked about before. But because of our deep selfishness, we have to address that first and realize that the fundamental thing about us is not our own love of ourself. So our basic status and dignity cannot be grounded in self-love, because that will let us down. Because sometimes this oscillates wildly, and we loathe ourselves sometimes. As soon as we do make mistakes, we're very hard on ourselves, and our self-love isn't to be the ground of our worth and our being and our identity. I think this is what he's driving at. But rather the limitless, unfailing love of Christ for us. Now, I understand if you're listening to this from outside the Christian tradition, that may sound bizarre or unusual or unattractive, but Hilton, and indeed he's drawing on the aspects of the gospel teaching of Jesus, is wanting the contemplative to start with, to ground their self-worth in being loved by God, not themselves. And then once that is in place, they will find that they are able to sustain the most remarkable, they can withstand anything. That's the most deeply rooted tree of all. They could even, in this practice that he's describing, withstand privations of the body and so on, and take that to extreme levels. I'm not keen on that. I don't really agree with, I think, the idea of an enclosed life away from the world. The love and the charity is what as we were talking about last week, is we are driven out, we're called by Christ to serve. But I do think that lesson, not to ground our basic identity and worth on our own faltering love of self, which goes wildly off the scale, boosting, inflating our ego one minute and then casts us down the next. But to ground it in being loved from outside ourselves by the force of life itself is the true path to, well, I don't know whether it's perfection, but certainly to true stability and happiness. So here's to our efforts along that particular path. God bless you this day as you go to ground.